Hi, everyone. Thank you for joining us tonight for another installation in Dialogue with DAP. My name is Veronica Lynch, and I am the Outreach Awareness Specialist for the Domestic Abuse Project of Delaware County. And tonight we are joined by some amazing community partners. Then we're going to talk about teen dating violence, how to have conversations with teens, and how to be an advocate for youth. And, we have a large panel today, so we're just going to get right into the conversation, and we're going to start with our introductions. And first, we have Gabby. If you'd like to introduce yourself.
Hi, my name is Gabby. I work with Lutheran Settlement House as the IPV teen advocate, and pretty much I just counsel teens and do a violence prevention program around STAR, which is students talking about relationships and teen dating violence and social justice.
Awesome. Great. And now we have Jen.
Hi, I'm Jen. I'm one of the counselors at DAP, and we provide many services to survivors of domestic violence and teen dating violence. We have our 24-hour hotline. We can meet with teenagers for crisis appointments to learn a little bit more about their situations and safety plan. And we have court accompaniment and also support groups and other workshops as well.
Awesome. Thank you. Hal.
Hey, everybody. I'm Hal Greenblatt. I'm from Child Guidance Resource Centers in the truancy program. I tend to work with families specifically revolving around truancy and communication within the home and doing whatever we can to try to get the kids back to school and get some stability in the house.
Perfect. Thank you. And Dr. Polis.
Hi, good evening, everyone. My name is Dr. Rachel Lee Polis, and now Fisher, actually. And I'm a pediatric adolescent gynecologist. I see patients in Media, Broomall, and Upland, and I'm a part of the Crozier Health System. And I see girls from birth to 25 for any of their GYN needs.
Great. Well, thank you all for joining us tonight. I'm really excited for the conversation that we're going to be able to have today and for the information that our parents and educators who are with us tonight will be able to see. All right, so my first question for you all is, how does, if at all, teen dating violence come up in your jobs? And Gabby, we can start with you.
So for me, as the teen advocate at Lutheran Settlement House, generally what I do is just counsel teens who experience, from 14 to 24, youth, I should say, who experience teen dating violence, and also in our STAR curriculum, which is students talking about relationships, we discuss teen dating violence and other social justice issues that exist in society. So that's how it's come up.
Great. And actually, I'm going to plug Gabby's program a little bit and hype it up because one of her students joined us last week in our teen roundtable discussion, and LaVonda was very excited to talk about the program. So obviously it's had a very positive impact. So I think that's a great program to be working with. Jen, would you like to go next?
Sure, yeah. So we can see teens of any age. They can always come into our agency anytime we're open, and they can contact our hotline 24/7. I think the way that teen dating violence has come up in my work is doing some outreach with schools and hearing a lot about how it's definitely occurring at pretty high rates, both in the schools, from parents calling concerned about their teenagers, and even supportive friends may call on behalf of their friend. But oftentimes the person in the actual relationship doesn't always reach out to us. And I think that there could be a lot of reasons for that, whether they think that their situation maybe isn't that serious, or they might be embarrassed or feel ashamed by that, or just generally not knowing what resources are available to them.
Yeah, thank you. And then we can do Hal and then Dr. Polis.
So unfortunately, it really hasn't come up that much with the clients that I've worked with. I want to say I'm fortunate, but I wish that I was able to work more with teens and dating violence, so you can get that information out there. But with the groups that I do run at Child Guidance, if there is a situation, I bring you guys in.
Yeah.
Veronica has obviously spoken with my boys before, and gives a plethora of information, so that when it comes up, we address it head on and try to get the kids to understand what is a healthy relationship and and to know that what they perceive as the norm is not the norm.
Absolutely. And I think that's really great. So anyone watching this knows too that we're always here to work with agencies, you know, so people don't have to feel like it's all on their shoulders. We're all like in this together. You know, it's like a team thing, and we're always trying to take on this problem head on. So if anyone else wants us to come in into groups, we're always happy to do that. And I loved working with your students, and it was like a ton of fun. So
yeah, and you're fantastic. And obviously it's a collaborative effort. If we're not working together, you know, then there's issues. We all got to help each other out. It's a helping hand.
Exactly. Awesome. Thank you. Dr. Willis? Oop, I think you're on mute still.
A part of the evaluation when I see patients is to talk about, you know, are they dating someone and what their relationship looks like. And so when we're having those discussions, we talk about healthy and unhealthy relationships, and if they feel that they're in a safe relationship. And from that discussion, you know, if we do identify a patient that we feel is in an unsafe relationship, we will actually have them contact DAP while they're in the office. You know, we find that patients are much more apt to reach out when they're right there in the office with us than just giving them the card and sending them home. So I think making that immediate referral right then is really important. So a part of, you know, every visit is kind of talking about, you know, do you feel safe in your relationship? And just asking certain questions that key in on that. So that's a part of what we do every day.
Awesome. And you all already touched on this in this question. My next question would be like, how does your, you know, agency support those experienced in domestic violence? And you all, you know, touch on that perfectly. So we can go into our next question, which is, how do you navigate conversations around teen dating violence or just dating in general? And we kind of like touch on this with the program that Gabby brought up, and even with, you know, talking about like the groups that we do with child guidance. So if you would like to expand on that. So how do we not navigate those conversations around teen dating violence or dating in general? And whoever would like to start, we can start.
I'll take it, I guess. It's tough because it's such a sensitive topic, and you have to know how to approach it. I know for me, I'm very blunt. And the reason I'm so blunt is because I build that relationship with the kids that I'm working with, so I know how I can address them. But as I mentioned before, a lot of these kids don't understand what a healthy relationship is, and you have to show examples and get them to understand that a healthy relationship is important, and you need to be able to know yourself in an effort to know somebody else and build a relationship that way. So it's tough.
Yeah. And it can be awkward, you know.
Very.
Sometimes it feels like you're pulling teeth and you're like, this is not fun for anyone. Let's just help each other out here.
Especially because as somebody who's a decent amount older than the kids I work with, they don't think I understand the situation they're coming from, when in reality, we all definitely do. We all grew up as kids, as teenagers, and we've been through it. Mm-hmm. So to build that trust is how you're able to really start to gauge where they're coming from.
Absolutely. Thank you.
To piggyback off what Hal's saying, I think it's really helpful to ask questions like, what do you think is a healthy relationship looks like? What are some adjectives you can use to describe that? What might an unhealthy relationship look like? And then kind of once you start that dialogue, then you can kind of create a picture of what it might look like. And so I find that's like a helpful way is by starting out by asking questions, and that starts the conversation and the dialogue.
Yeah, I think that's great. And something that we have started to do, I do with like my middle schoolers and sometimes high schoolers. They don't like to play games with me as much as like high schoolers do, is that we talk about if they could have their ultimate celebrity like couple, or if they could date a celebrity, who would they date, and like how would they want to treat that person, and how would they want to be treated by that person. So like you said, just getting those adjectives out there. Once we start to actually verbalize it and see it, maybe even write it down, and actually see what we want, and kind of like, you know, with manifesting it, I think that's always a strong step. Even if we disagree with what we wrote down the first time, and we change our mind after we have these conversations, at least it's a start.
Yeah, I agree. I think that part of it is that an important piece is in having these conversations is coming from a place of being non-judgmental and open to hearing what they have to say about their situations, because we all, you know, as the adults in these teens' lives may have strong beliefs about, you know, what they deserve and what they should and shouldn't be putting up with. And so we have to kind of put those aside and come from a place of empathy and caring as well, and wanting to understand them without having them feel like they're judged or being pressured into making a choice that they don't necessarily want to make right away.
Definitely. And Gabby, with your program being surrounded around relationships, how do you take those steps?
I would definitely say, as with Hal, just agreeing with him about building rapport with the teens. So I feel as though it's really important to build like that rapport and that trust. And I also feel as though that even though like we come into like the room as experts, and also like offering advice and probably like awareness about certain topics, I feel as though like it's very important also to understand that you can also learn from teens.
Absolutely.
When it comes to like relationships. So actually like working with teens and talking to them about like teen dating violence, I feel as though like they give me like new concepts about like relationships, and I'm like, what is that? And they're like, oh, this is what this is. So I think like that's also a really important aspect. And also like when counseling, as in providing like a non-judgmental space. I spoke with like a couple other people earlier today, and someone said like a safe place to fall. It really matters to like give teens when they're in like teen dating violence relationships. So I feel as though like those things are very important.
Definitely. I totally agree with we have things to learn. I can speak, I think, for anyways for kids, I learn something new every single time. Everything's constantly changing. And I think this came up in our teen roundtable discussion, is that they were talking about the difference between a relationship and a situationship. And I was like, oh my God, this is all so much more complicated than it needs to be. Because when I was in middle school and high school, it was you were talking and then you were dating. So now there's like talking, you're sorted together, now you're dating, but now you're broken up. So, you know, you have to be open to learning new things, because definitely it's, you know, things can be crazy. So. And I would like to just go back to like one of the comments that we got was like, it says, talk to them from a young age so they know what is healthy. When do you think, okay, when they're young, so they're aware what's a healthy relationship and unhealthy relationship. So when is a good age to start having these conversations, do you think?
I think when they're 12 or 13 is a really good time to start that conversation. So in the early adolescent stage. And I think that by giving them also examples, you know, you might be watching television as a family and you might see something come up on TV, and that might be, you know, a positive or a negative experience that you can talk about. You might be driving in the car and see like a billboard. So I think you can use anything as like a standoff for there to be conversation and dialogue. And then, you know, of course, ideally, it's great to see modeling in a positive way from your parents. You know, not all, you know, adolescents, though, have a two-parent home, and many people have different family situations. So I think also using examples outside of your house, too, can be really helpful, you know, to help provide education. So I think the earlier we start in kind of planting those seeds, the better. And so it's important to kind of continue that dialogue from the start.
Yeah, I definitely agree. Would anyone like to add to that?
I think even earlier, you can start having conversations, not necessarily in the context of their own relationships, but even thinking about teaching kids how they can be critical about what sorts of messages they're learning from media, like whether it be, you know, about gender roles in different kinds of superhero movies or Disney movies, and having critical conversations with them about what they're learning and what does that mean for, you know, what they think about themselves and what they should or shouldn't be doing.
That's great.
You know, I'm glad that you both kind of put a number on it, because I don't know that answer. It's scary because kids are getting older at a younger age now. So when is too young to talk to these kids about what a healthy relationship is? You know, is it 7, 8? Is it 12, 13? You know, I guess it's based on the maturity level of the kid and whether they're maturing faster. But I don't think there is, you know, one specific number, because everything is just always changing right now.
Definitely. Especially with social media and things, you know, I just think about how different my middle school and high school experience is from the kids now that I work with, because, you know, I didn't have a cell phone until well, I had like a flip phone thing up until like senior year of high school. And then I finally got an iPhone and I was like, I don't really care about this. But now, right, that's that's a requirement in a relationship, whether or not you're going to post each other on your Instagram accounts. And if you are you posting it on your story so it's going to go away? Or are you going to do a post that's going to, so everyone knows like who you're dating? So now there's like all these dynamics added to younger relationships, as well as like these standards that you have to meet, or you might feel pressured to meet because you see this stuff all the time. And I really like that you brought up, both Jen and Dr. Polis brought up using TV and things like that, because at DAP, we love to do that. We actually did like a whole Facebook Live on like domestic violence in the media. We did that for like a whole month and everything. And because that's where we learn a lot of messages, reading books or anything like that. So I definitely agree with everyone on that. Any last comments before we move on? Anyone like to share? Gabby, would you like to say anything?
I was going to say, I just agree in the sense of like, I believe as long as like I would say youth, I wouldn't say child, can like understand the concept of relationships, even if it's starting with like a family relationship, it's good to talk about like what's healthy and what's unhealthy. And I think also an importance is kind of incorporating boundaries. So like talking about those things is kind of like a starter point to be like, hey, this is what like a healthy and unhealthy relationship looks like. So
exactly. Even if it's not romantic, right? If it's
definitely
with friends, it's with, your peers in school, all of that. I agree. Definitely talking about boundaries and how all of that is encompassed. Absolutely. All right. And so do any specific conversations that you've had around dating like stand out to you? Maybe when you were younger and an adult talked to you, or maybe just in your experience in your career? Does anyone want to start with that?
I can share for this one. I remember going to a middle school, I think, or a high school early in my work with DAP, and just kind of collaborating and getting a sense for what they've been observing in their schools and sharing a little bit about our services, and hearing from a guidance counselor a lot of physical and gender-based violence that was even occurring in the school, of like boys shoving girls into lockers. And something that stood out to me that she said was that the girls don't know how to say no. And Gabby, I think what you said about, teaching everyone how to set boundaries is really important, and talking about what's a healthy boundary and how can you stick with that. And that comment from that guidance counselor really made me think about just the systemic issues that come into play with like sexism and gender roles and all of these things that mesh with, and it all comes together with these ideas about what's acceptable and what's not. And so I think that those are definitely those kinds of early conversations where if we can start having young people question these roles and norms, and maybe that there could be some movement in some of these areas.
Yeah, definitely.
I would say for me, maybe like, I guess hopefully I'm rephrasing and sorry, but in the sense of talking about relationships with teens, one thing that I remember is more so when I talk about to teens about like dating violence and kind of what that looks like. They're like, oh, we know what that is, but we didn't have the language for it. So I feel as though like having that conversation about dating violence and what it looks like, and kind of like healthy, unhealthy, or like an abusive relationship, like those things are really important to teens, for them to make a, I guess, correlation between both of them, to be like, hey, this is what it is. And even though we see these things on the media, we see these things that are normalized, most definitely in society. These things do exist and these things do happen. And I think also some teens also realize like I might have been through this. So I think it's really important to kind of just give them the language to know like, hey, this is what that is.
That's great. Thank you.
I have another comment about the teens directly too. I think it's been surprising for me to learn that the amount that like suicide and suicide attempts and threats are coming up in teen dating violence relationships, whether it's oftentimes like the abuse, the more the unhealthy partner threatening to harm themselves, and how scary that is for the other person in the relationship to feel like they're going to be responsible if their partner does something to harm themselves. And so I think it's really important to safety plan with those teenagers and talk with them about, what can they do in a situation like that, and normalize that that's really scary for them, and they shouldn't be expected to have the answers of what to do in a situation like that.
Yeah. And that is a conversation that, I do have with like my students now. So you're definitely like hitting the nail on the head with what they feel as if that weight is on their shoulders, right? That they almost take on this like adult role which is not when you're in middle school or high school or even college, or even if you are an adult and you're not like a licensed counselor. That's a hard role to have. Like, unless you were actually given the tools, you sat down and trained to respond to comments like that, that can be like, you know, so draining and very scary. So that's something, yeah, we definitely need a safety plan around that. And just also point out that that is not a, you know, is that a call for help? Or like, that's not a sign of love if someone's saying that you are worth that much to them that they will hurt themselves, right? That is a major red flag, and that we need to look for healthy signs of love and healthy communication in that way. So great point, Jen.
Another important concept I think that's important to address in conversations is talking about consent. Like, yes. What does consent mean? And just because you're consenting to something today, you might want something different tomorrow or even later that day. And just so educating, you know, patients about what that means and the importance of having them to make different decisions at different times.
Yeah.
So I think addressing that as a part of the conversation is really important.
Yeah, absolutely. Thank you. How did you want to add anything?
Just to kind of piggyback off of that, I mean, with consent, and we all know the statement, no means no. Mm-hmm. And that goes at any point in time.
Absolutely.
Anytime somebody feels uncomfortable and they say no, that's it.
Yeah.
And, you know, end of story.
Yeah. Right. And I think now too, when I was growing up, right, there was a lot of songs were like, well, you know, means no, but you know, they actually means yes. But I think we need to like get rid of that language, right? Because that was like major jokes and everything. Mm-hmm. Absolutely. Just having that. And even one of the comments that comes up, like, this goes beyond romantic relationships. If our friends say something makes us like makes them uncomfortable, we stop. Right. If our family member says, I don't like when you do this, or we say that to a family member, it should stop. And consent, you know, goes beyond all of that. And I think that's right. It goes back to boundaries and communication and what are the roles that we are playing around people.
And I just want, and jumping back to the question from before, a lot of issues that aren't addressed is the peer pressure from friends to kind of force each other to be in relationships when they're not ready. So they're starting to try to experience things when they're not prepared. And that's coming from, you know, outside people when it should be on you. If you're not ready, again, no. So, you know, you got to listen to yourself and not the people around you.
And that even goes into my experience working with students where they'll ask me about my experience, you know, dating in middle school. And I'll be like, hey, I'll be straight up. Didn't happen for me. Wasn't, you know, it's like, that just wasn't, you know, my thing. I was reading books, and they'll even make fun of me for middle school. I'm like, I'm out of college now, guys. Like, you can't trick me like this. I think of a new project here. But yeah, it still remains like dating is a social status. It's like a way to, you know, show off. You know, it's a way to feel as if, you know, when you're going through puberty, you just want to be an adult, you know, but that's how I felt. I was like, I want to get out of this, and I'm ready to be grown up. So, and dating is usually one of the first signs of that. Is like when you're with that person, now you're mature enough to share your feelings and talk about that. But
and it makes you feel like you're part of the in crowd.
Absolutely. Yeah. Especially when you have social media playing that, and you can post your picture and you're getting likes and you're getting comments and everyone's hyping you up because you know, you look cooler now. But yeah, I think that's a big thing too. We talk about when we're ready for things, when we're ready to, you know, even and define what dating means for you at that point, because it doesn't not automatically mean that we have to be, you know, touching and like being that romantic. It just means we hang out, you know, we talk. And so it's all about being open and honest and communicating with people about what we're comfortable with. Okay. And so what are the challenges and the positives that come out of having these conversations with your students and patients and clients? So challenges and positives.
I think we've already started to touch on some of the challenges being like everything that teenagers today are dealing with that the adults didn't have to deal with, whether it's like all of the mass shootings that they are a witness to, you know, the pandemic right now, social media, all of those things are like in the background with their developing brains. And so they don't have the foresight they're not supposed to. That's not the way their brains are working. So those are the big barriers, I think. And the importance of, as we've been talking a little bit about, is the peer pressure and like how crucial the opinions of their peers are to them. So it's like you really have to keep all of those contextual factors in mind. I think some of the positives are that we've kind of been talking, you've been alluding to it, Veronica, that like teenagers want to be cool. And so if you are like the kind of lame adult in their life who they can feel like they are, you know, they can make fun of you for how you were lame in middle school, like that's great for them. And that can make them feel good in the moment and feel comfortable with you that like, hey, this isn't like a scary adult to me. This person can relate to me. So I think building that trust is really an important piece. And so I think once you have that trust with a teenager, they can also be really honest with you about what's going on in their lives too.
Definitely.
One of the great positives I found is that if you bring up and start to have dialogue about this, you know, teens want to help their friends. So, you know, if it's a conversation that you address, then oftentimes it'll be brought up, well, I have a girlfriend that's going through this right now. And what are ways that I can help her? And so I think it just brings up and creates a discussion about it that then fosters them talking to others and kind of keeps that moving forward. So that's one of the, I think, most positive and rewarding things that I found out of talking about this, that we're able to help others, like on the periphery, that I might not even be meeting with on that particular day.
Yeah, that's a great point, right? Breaking down, getting rid of that bystander effect and having people, you know, be that support person for others who might be struggling. That's great.
With challenges, I think just getting the teen to understand that violence in dating is an issue. You know, there's so many concerns that arise with teens and dating. And so much is just brushed to the side thinking, oh, it's not a big deal. It's not going to happen to me. If it happened to me, it only happened once. But the issue is, it is an issue. You know, that is a problem. One time is one time too many. So just getting teens and people in general to understand and to recognize when things are not okay, to voice it and to get help. So it's the understanding and the recognition of finding out what a healthy relationship actually is.
Yeah. Right. Especially when you're at that age, like things being serious can be kind of scary. So when you are talking about this stuff and like talking about dating violence, and then you recognize that might have happened to you, the first thing you want to do would be like, well, you know, that sounds bad, but you know, it wasn't that bad when it happened. Like I handled it. So there's kind of like that minimizing. So kind of getting behind, like, there's no shame in this. You're not alone in this, and that we are people you can talk to. It's not embarrassing. Well, you know, they might feel embarrassed, but we know that embarrassing things happen and we're here to help out. And
it goes back to what Gabby said. Sorry for cutting you off. I saw you just went on mute about 10 minutes ago. It's creating that safe space, that open area where, you know, they're comfortable talking to you. And I'm going to send it right back to Gabby. Sorry about that.
It's all right. I'm like, yes, go Hal. Most definitely. I would say like one of the challenges that I see, I actually forgot your name. I'm sorry. The counselor for that.
Oh, Jen.
I'm sorry. But I would say most definitely teaching about a specific topic in a society that condones violence. So I think that's like a really challenge for me. And it's like, hey, this is something that is condoned and something that's normalized. But I think the positive in it, like Hal said, is creating a safe space to explore, like, what have we learned in society? What have we learned that's not right and not correct, and how do we correct it? And I think another thing is also cycles. Like, as we know, abuse is a cycle, but cycles can be broken. So creating spaces where we can give knowledge to teens and youth, let them know like what teen dating violence is, or what unhealthy gender roles are, or what stereotypes is, and how we can break these things and create change in the world is like a positive that I definitely get out of this work. So yeah.
I think you all brought up amazing points, and especially Gabby, like what you just said, gender roles. I think that's probably the biggest challenge I have faced is the minute I bring up gender roles, people just laugh about it. I'm like, but this is serious. And so that's like my soapbox that I like to get on. But I think one of the positives is just, it can be really fun, right? You're just talking about, you know, you're letting people have fun. You're talking about this and kind of getting over that hump of like shame. And like Jen said, I'm okay with being made fun of in my groups. You know, we're there to joke around. It doesn't bother me at all. And I love having, like you said, like that safe space for people to just relax and get things off their chest. I mean, some of the comments that get brought up in groups are often you're like, okay, we're going to ignore that was said and just keep moving and stay on a productive note. But it's always such a great time. So thank you all for your comments. Okay. Are there any tips that you would like to share? I mean, we all kind of like touch on things with creating a safe space, but I guess at the start of your career to now, has there been anything that you learned that helps with that?
I think for me, I know like just reviewing like the question, in the sense of coming into the work of teen dating violence. So like I used to work in like with adults, but coming into the work of working with youth, I think for me is also being able to learn from them, which I mentioned before. Like, yeah, I'm this big well, I don't want to say big expert because I'm still learning, but yeah, I'm like this expert that comes into a space to teach you something, but being willing to be open and say like, hey, I can still learn from you guys. And I think like creating that relationship also allows them to create trust for them to like either vent to you about what they don't know, or to vent to you about things that they do know, that you can also learn about. And I also believe like validation for youth is really important. Yes. So a lot of times, like when I'm working with youth or some adults, they're like, hey, that's their little friend. That's not like their partner. And I'm like, they're in a relationship. So actually like giving this teen like validation to understand like you do have feelings, your feelings are valid. And if you view yourself as a relationship, that's a real life thing. Like you're in a relationship. So I think like learning how to like validate teens and allow them to know like your feelings matter, like your voice matters. So that's like really important. But yeah.
That was great. Thank you. Jen, I see you're unmuted, so if you'd like to.
I think Hal might have brought it up earlier about that we've all been at this age before. And so trying to get back into that headspace a little bit, maybe before having a conversation with a teenager, of like just remembering how, you know, how big things felt to us at that time and how things felt like it was the end of the world. It felt like everyone's looking at you, like trying to get back there and remembering that as you're going into these conversations. I think that that's really important, and acknowledging that like, oh yeah, I did dumb things when I was a teenager. I made decisions that I regretted, and that's normal and that's part of development. And so just keeping that in mind, that that's part of growing up. And if you can have that as you're considering what you're going to talk about with your teenager that you're having these conversations with, is like, okay, you know, I might be planting a seed for right now, or we might have to revisit this in a week as the situation changes, but at least we're starting the conversation.
Yeah, I definitely agree. And I'd like to, we just said like things feeling so like a big deal at the same time, like, and getting back into that headspace. I was even thinking like today, I had to give kudos to kids or like who like are always on social media and posting TikToks, because I was like, I feel like an idiot doing this, but they are out there pumping these TikToks out and they look great. And I was like, that's confidence that I admire, because I was literally sweating posting this thing because I was like, oh man, people are going to see this. But then like, you know, but then I have to give it to them because I'm like, you guys go out in the world, no shame. And I love that. So it's like having that moment of like learning, like seeing what I can learn from kids when it comes to social media things, but also understanding the pressure that is social media, right? Like I'm an adult, I'm posting TikToks for work, and yet I'm still like, oh man, I don't want to look dumb. And so Matt, like constantly having to do that in your social life and personal life too, I'm sure it has like constant effects. So always, like you said, validating, understanding the feelings that are coming from. Yeah, I agree.
Well, and that's actually my tip. It's don't believe social media. I mean, we've all posted, you know, pictures of, you know, being in relationships, whether we're happy or sad. And, you know, the picture doesn't tell the story of what's actually happening. I mean, it's why on my social media, it's just pictures of my dog now.
Yeah.
Because, you know, there's no story behind that. That's, you know, that's my guy. But nobody knows what's going on when you post a picture with your significant other and you're smiling when 2 minutes before you could have been in an argument. So, you know, it goes with the peer pressure. Don't believe what you're seeing on social media, because it's not what you necessarily think it is. So, you know, you got to be okay with yourself and do what makes you happy.
Yeah. Yeah, absolutely.
Well, piggybacking off of what Hal said, it's, you know, sometimes about just shutting it off and just disconnecting. Like the constant just, now particularly kids are always on the computer because of electronic learning, and it's just kind of nonstop. And I think that's also impacting how people are sleeping and just their stress levels, and it's just always about how many likes you're getting. And so I think just having time just to be away from social media, put the phone down, and picking up some sort of other hobby, if it's a sport or some of my patients are into art or music, having a conversation at dinner with your family and not, having the cell phone out. I think kind of reconnecting with those things is really important, so that, we can disconnect a little bit and not be, feel so much pressure that we're missing something if we're not logging in, because sometimes we're actually missing out when we're on life experiences, when we're kind of always tapped into the phone and not really present in that moment, enjoying that experience that we're presently in. So that's something that I really encourage people to do, is just, turn it off.
Absolutely. And as we stream this on social media, I agree. I totally agree. And I think that's so underrated too, just not having your phone or anything around you and just being present in the moment. And as much as we say it now, it's so hard, right? Because of the situations that we're in, we have to connect over the computer. But there's just moments where we can, right before bed, right? Maybe an hour before we go to sleep, we don't look at our phones and we read a book. I always try to leave my groups off with, please read a book, whatever book it is. But that was all great tips. Thank you. Okay. And if anyone watching this has any questions that they specifically want to ask any of our guests tonight, please feel free. They have plenty of information to share. Okay. So how do you wish that dating and dating violence was discussed with you as a young one?
I just kind of wish it was discussed, because with me it wasn't. And it's funny because it's not even 20 years ago that I was a teenager, and it was such a different time then, and so much has changed. As we discussed, the social media aspect of it it just dominates the dating life now. So for me, I wish it was discussed with me.
Yeah.
I love my parents, but they never had the relationship discussion with me. I think my dad said maybe 10 words to me when I was a freshman in college. So, almost out of being a teenager. So I just wish it was discussed. I had to kind of learn it, from on my own and from my friends, which is kind of in contrast of what I've been saying the whole time. Yeah. But,
But now you're talking from experience, right? This is how you can compare and contrast.
This is why I say I'm not an expert, so.
Anyone else?
I think as far as how I would have liked for it to be discussed is just thinking about what narratives are we using, and I think that can be so much victim blaming out there as far as situations like this of well, what did you miss in this relationship? What red flags did you not see? What why'd you go back to this person? And so I think that we can do better as the adults in society of changing the way we have these conversations and holding the perpetrators accountable and trying to be mindful of what kind of language we're using in terms of this. And I think another thing that the youth are really great at are being inclusive with different gender and sexual orientations. Absolutely. And so that it's not just there's such a narrative too about that the male might be the perpetrator and the female might be the victim in a situation, and that's not necessarily always the case. And we can't make assumptions and thinking about how much stigma there can be for those who might be in LGBT relationships or for males who might be the survivor and not the perpetrator. So there's just a lot there that is up and coming. And so I think that it's important to change and broaden our perspective on how we're looking at these situations.
Yeah, I totally agree. Thank you. Gabby, would you like to share?
Sure. How I would I think speaking about relationships, I think I had conversations with my parents about relationships. some where I'm like, okay, I don't want to talk to them about that. But it's also some that they also like inform me about certain stuff. I will also say, like, growing up in school, I don't really remember speaking about like or learning about teen dating violence, like or just like relationships in general. Like we learned about the DARE program, not to do drugs, and like a driver's test and a physical. That's all I remember, and like health class and stuff like that. But I feel like if they possibly would have implemented like more about like teen dating violence and also like understanding some of the things that some of my friends personally went through, it could have made a big change. So yeah, I think like implementing that stuff. Yeah.
Dr. Polis-Fisher?
I was just going to say, like, piggybacking off of what Gabby said, I think it would be really helpful to incorporate more of this into the schools. And so, I think the more that we educate and create conversation and dialogue, the more helpful it is for our youth. So it's something that I feel like was lacking, when I was in high school. And I mean, from elementary school, really, quite frankly, I just remember the DARE program. And so I think we can do better.
Yeah. I kind of think go ahead.
Sorry. Well, that's the key. It's dialogue. It's communication. The more we're willing to talk, the less taboo, the less uncomfortable it's going to be because it's out there. We're going to be able to speak our minds and share our opinions and really start to understand and hear each other. It's one thing to listen. It's another to hear. So really the key is the dialogue, is to communicate. It's to get the word out there and talk to each other about this.
Exactly. And I think too, because we have to acknowledging the fact that every school has its own environment, right? Its own like tone. I went to an art school for middle school and high school, which was completely different from like the other schools around, right? At our school, like dating really wasn't a thing at my school. Like, I'll be honest, that like we did plays and people danced and things. So like dating was not talked about because we were all just like, I think like too nerdy to really date. And so then it all kind of happened like afterwards. So no conversations were really had, like we all said. And then, college came, we're leaving and now we're navigating this stuff on our own. And it can definitely be like weird because you don't know what is normal or not normal because you just go on based on like, all right, this makes me feel like excited. So, right, that must be a good thing. I feel, I have all these emotions. That must be, we're passionate about each other. So it's like when we break down these feelings of, this is what this looks like. Anger does not automatically mean that they are in love with you, right? Because them being jealous doesn't mean that they care about you. When we break down, all those aspects and just have a normal conversation about it, like we all said, like without shame or embarrassment, it definitely helps in the long run. Because I think in our health class, we had DARE and then, you talked about STDs and then that was it. Nothing in between about how any of that happens or, what to do if that happens, who you can talk to, and, not to be embarrassed by it, not to be afraid to reach out for help. Yeah. All right.
And a lot of those conversations can be very fear-based as well, of like, if you do this thing, the worst thing ever is going to happen to you. And so I think those extreme, like teaching teenagers that you're going to have one or two extremes is not super helpful either. So like, how can we bring it to the middle a little bit?
Yeah. I think because there's like that scene in Mean Girls where they're like, you will get pregnant and you will die. That is kind of like the tone that is set until you like come and you're like, no, there's things you can do, right? And you just have to have those conversations about it. Awesome.
Well, and to, one more comment in terms of when you see patients that are positive for an STD, just reassuring them they're not alone. Like you were saying, it's not something that people talk about often, but it's very common. And so making them feel like, it's not the end of the world. We're going to have a solution to this, a treatment method, and just reassuring them that they're not the only one that this is happening to. So to not feel so bad about it, I think is really important. I always say, you're just one of the unlucky ones, but it's super common. Yeah. So, let's just kind of move past it and think about ways the next time we can be a little bit safer so it doesn't happen again. So.
Yeah. And I think that's also one of the great things about social media. Like as much as it is like very scary, you can get your voice out there to so many people and you can create this community where we understand that we're not alone and that there are connections for everyone. And I think, having moments like this, these conversations where it'll be posted on Facebook and like people can find it and just see that these are normal things to talk about. And this does happen to, you know, a good amount of people. Like the statistic for teen dating violence is 1 in 3 adolescents before they get out of high school. And you think about how big high schools are now, that's a lot of students. And then, you know, the number grows when you go into college. And then, you know, if you haven't had these conversations by then, like, we know it is a cycle. Not that it means every relationship you're going to be in is going to be unhealthy, but right, what can we do to know the red flags and to just who can we go to in case our relationship isn't healthy? Who can I call and ask questions to? Mm-hmm. So has your perspective on teen dating violence changed throughout your career? If yes, how so? And if no, what has your perspective been this whole time? Gabby, it looks like you want to start us off. I see you thinking.
I'm like thinking about the question. I think I like my previous answer about like the validation piece. I feel as though that's very important. As well as like the language and the sense of teen dating violence. When I first started, I knew like, okay, this thing does exist. But learning more and then actually like speaking with youth about it, it's like a really real thing, and it's present. So most definitely I feel as though like validating teens around that issue and also giving them the language has like what I guess my perspective about teen dating violence has changed. That there's more than just like, I guess I don't want to say the typical like the common abuses and things like that, but there's other things that plays a role in teen dating violence. So I think that's probably how my perspective changed throughout like working with it.
Great.
You know, piggybacking off of what Gabby said, you know, for me, it's been all about the subtleness that can happen. You know, is it someone, you know, going through your cell phone and monitoring kind of who you're talking to? Is it someone telling you what you should or shouldn't wear or what friends you should connect with? So it's the subtleness of teen dating violence that I really became more aware of. And actually in talking with patients too, they don't always realize that there are these kind of just very subtle things that are going on that are creating this disconnect between them and their friends and their family. And that these are, you know, red flags of an unhealthy relationship too. So that's something that I've, you know, really kind of picked up and taken away in learning more about teen dating violence.
Yeah, I think that's so important.
And to follow up on that, I guess with how prevalent it is, I believe you said it's 1 in 3.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, I mean that number is astronomical. It's not something you would ever expect. So just how common it is, and it's, you know, we need to empower the teens to know the knowledge and to get help to understand what violence is, what abuse is, because it's not just physical.
Yeah, I agree with what everyone's sharing. And I think that the term even teen dating violence can be a bit of a misnomer, that it's not always physically violent or sexually violent situations. It can be a lot of these emotional and control tactics can be a lot of what we're seeing among teenagers. And those are the things, like we've been saying, that are more invisible and less talked about.
Yeah, and I think this even goes back to what you were saying before with like, what narratives are we putting out there, right? And that the conversations that we're having, especially how we're teaching this, because, right, the first thing that a lot of my students do share is like, well, if they're not hitting me, I can get over it. Right, because that's the biggest sign, or I guess like that's what they consider to be the most worthwhile form of dating violence, is that actually being hit. But again, like people going through your phone, like breaching your privacy, telling you what you can and can't wear, you know, breaking down your confidence. Those are all, they have long-lasting effects. They have long-lasting health effects too. So it's not something that we just kind of like get over once we're out of high school. There's things that can stick with us for a really long time unless we like take the steps to heal from it. And if we're not, you know, that can be really painful in the long run. All right.
You know, something else too I was going to mention is like reproductive sabotage. So like your partner doesn't want you to use birth control, doesn't want to use condoms. And so when I see those patients, you know, we talk about other alternative forms of birth control that your partner doesn't necessarily need to know about. So for example, like an IUD or an implant in the arm, so that, you know, someone's not monitoring the pills that you're taking. And so just giving them alternative options so that they can feel like they're making the choices that they want to make as well.
Definitely. That is, and that's something that kind of gets, when we have those conversations, that kind of gets like scoffed at, right? Like that seems like so wildly out there, you know, that would, they're like, well, that no one would ever do that. And you're like, but it happens. It happens a lot. And, you know, again, it's not something that, you know, you just see in TV and under like a horror movie. It happens in real life. And, you know, there are real solutions that we can always help, you know, people take, that give you back that power and control that someone has taken from you. So thank you for bringing that up. So we have kind of talked about this a lot, or in the past conversation, so we can kind of meld the last two questions together as we begin to wrap this up. But where do you believe your students and patients and clients get their messages from dating from? And we kind of like touched on this. And the second question to that is, if you could share one thing about dating with our parents watching or your students or anyone watching, what would it be?
I would, sorry.
No, please. Ladies first.
I would say that our environment, like I know a lot of times like we reverted to like media, which actually I feel as though media does like influence a lot of things. But I believe our environment in general, so that can look like our family members, that can look like our friends, our community, what we see outside. Those might be concepts that youth might learn, like, oh, this is healthy, even though it's not. It might be toxic and unhealthy or abusive. So I believe our environment, media plays a role, most definitely, in normalizing things. But I most definitely believe in our environment. Some advice that I would give you when it comes to relationships are having boundaries, and to understand that when you are creating boundaries, that boundaries are created for you and not someone else. So if it does make someone else uncomfortable, that's okay. Just as long as you're safe and you're in a safe place. So, yeah.
That's great. Thank you.
I don't want to feel like I'm harping on social media, because I do enjoy social media, but you know, we get so much of our relationship advice and information from social media. You know, we need to kind of learn from the people around us, from our parents, from, you know, our families, what a healthy relationship is. And even a family that's divorced can tell you what a healthy relationship is. You know, it doesn't have to be the nuclear family of, you know, two different gendered parents and two kids. You know, that's one form of a healthy relationship, but there's so many others. And the advice is, you can't be in a healthy relationship if you're not in a healthy relationship with yourself first. You need to learn to understand, to love, to care about yourself. To echo what Gabby said, to learn boundaries for yourself, and create, you know, an aura of happiness around you. And only then, once you're willing to give that to yourself, can you give that to other people. And that's not just in a physical relationship, but, you know, a healthy relationship with friends and significant others and everything. You have to love yourself first.
Love to hear it.
Yeah. And to piggyback off of what Hal is saying, I think it's really important that when you're in a relationship, it's a part of your life, but it's not your whole life.
Yeah.
So you're still, you know, you still have your friends outside of your relationship, and your family, and your hobbies, and your interests, and you're not losing sight of those. So it's concerning to me when a patient just talks about everything that they're doing with their boyfriend, and nothing that they're, you know, doing with just themselves and their girlfriends or their family. And so I think staying connected with yourself is really important, and not losing sight of that. And people, I think, who have that also have healthier relationships, because you have things to contribute to that relationship, and things that you enjoy as well. So that's one thing that I think is really important to impart, is not to lose sight of you.
It's funny, because I actually said to my girlfriend on one of our first dates, the healthiest relationship we can have is a Venn diagram. There's my life, there's your life, and then there's our life in the middle, which, you know, just goes to what you said. You know, I still go out and I golf with my buddies. You know, she goes and does whatever she wants with her friends. And then we come together for, you know, a date night where we watch a movie or we go with her friends. It's a Venn diagram. And that's how I described exactly what a healthy relationship is for us.
I think that's great.
Yeah, I think that's a good way of looking at it for sure. I think what I would add for teenagers too is just that it's normal for their ideas and perspectives and interests to be changing over in right now and in the next couple of years, and to keep that in mind, and that dating should be fun too. I think that's what kind of gets lost in these conversations. And so that should be part of it. And if they're not having fun, and if they are not with a partner who is willing to change and grow with them, then that may not be the best relationship for them, and that they might be able to find in the future, as they're spending time with themselves and getting to know, like, who am I as a person and an individual, that may be the time when they have that self-love to be able to share that with another person who, would grow with them.
Exactly. Yeah, I think just to add to that too, it's like giving ourselves and teens, just give yourself some grace, right? Some forgiveness if maybe we did things that we don't agree with now, we don't let that hold ourselves back, that we are worthy of, changing and feeling good about ourselves. And I think that's the biggest thing when I talk about getting help, is that people think of it, it might be a sign of weakness. And I was like, well, I just think it just means you feel as if you deserve to feel good. And I think we all deserve to feel good about ourselves, whatever that means for us and whatever that steps that we have to take to get there. But thank you all for your amazing information tonight. I really appreciate it. And I think that everyone who watched with us tonight appreciated it. If you have anything, any last comments you'd like to, any plugs, any shameless plugs you guys want to put in there, want to hype yourselves up or anything, feel free. If not, we're going to wrap up. I will do a shameless plug if no one else will. Again, I'm going to hype up our TikTok account, which you can follow us at DapDalco and see TikToks of me trying not to look dumb. So, all right. Thank you all. And thank you everyone for joining us tonight. And good night.
Thank you.
Bye. Good night.
Okay, cool. I think